I went to a fancy college that not everyone could get into. I really liked it a lot, but I'll never forget this scary thing. I got food in the restaurant around 7 p.m. and came back. I saw something strange on my way back to my dorm room. There was a man walking down the halls. It's important to note that my dorm was only for women, so seeing a guy there was strange. He looked like he was in his 30s, which makes it even stranger. I thought he might be visiting someone, which does happen sometimes. I didn't pay much attention, so I just went to my room. The other person in my room had left for the weekend on Friday. I did all of my weekend homework and then turned on the TV. After about an hour, I went to the bathroom across the hall, which was easy. After putting on my show again when I got back to my room, I heard a noise on the other side of my room after about 10 minutes. I didn't pay much attention to it because I was so into my show, until I heard it again. This time it was louder. I looked up to see what it was and was shocked by what I saw. A man came out from behind my roommate's desk. In fact, it was the same man I had seen earlier in the hall. He was walking straight toward me with a smile on his face. I screamed and ran as fast as I could to the door. I barely got out of my room before the door slammed shut behind me. I ran down the hall. He didn't follow me. He yelled after me that he was wrong and that he thought I was someone else. But that creepy smile he had, I didn't believe him. My friend lived on the floor above me, so I ran to her room and we called the campus police. They got there quickly and caught a man leaving the building. It turned out that someone had let him into the building earlier. He got into my room because I forgot to lock it when I went to the bathroom. Once I knew, I felt both relieved and scared. What a close call it was for something much worse to happen. The most scary thing that's ever happened to me was this. I believe in the supernatural. My dad told me one day that he and his ex-girlfriend went to a lonely old graveyard in South Carolina that no one knew about. People who live in the area call the graveyard Witches and Morlocks because it has graves from the 1600s and 1700s. The graveyard is right next to a very old farm that is now privately owned. A long time ago, slaves were killed in this farm's well. Short version. While walking through the graves, my dad and his lady heard strange noises. The sounds were even caught on his night camera. He said that the trees made a sound like popping, but the closest thing that could have made that sound was 12 miles away. The noise got louder until my dad and his lover turned around and drove away quickly. That was 19 years ago. Now my dad and I were driving to the same place, and he told me the story about the well. I was sorry, but it was too dark for me to see the well. We drove deeper into the old empty woods after being scared by a black dog. I started to feel both excited and nervous. It was dark up above the trees, and I could see the dirt road and square walls around the fields where the well was. Like when you see forms in the sky, I remember seeing things in the tall grass that looked like bodies and faces hanging there. At the time, I didn't think much of it. There is truth to what my dad said about the bush getting scarier as you go deeper into it. It kept getting more and more exciting. When we got to the end of the forest, we could still see the farm's empty shed. Around the corner of my eye, I could see the tops of graves in the tall grass that were not marked. Through my open window, I saw the dark graves and felt excited. When I opened my eyes, I saw something floating over a grave. The white dress seemed to float in the air, with puffy arms and a skirt that was getting shorter. A very faint white arm could just about be seen through the sleeves. What I saw is still stuck in my mind like a picture. I was excited until all of a sudden I felt sick and like I was going to throw up. The dress scared me, so I told my dad about it. He said it was most likely just a scratch on the window, but it was wide open. We looked for something else by shining our flashlights on the dead grass. I was going to cry, so I asked my dad to take me home. I wanted to go back because I thought I might see the dress again. My dad laughed and said it must have been something I ate, but I wasn't feeling sick because of food. When I shined my flashlight on the graves, I felt cold fear running through my body. I was frozen with fear. There was no dress or body in sight. It was right here. The dress was right here. While breathing hard and quickly, I pointed to the top of a grave that was about 3 feet high. I felt more and more scared. I still want to go back to that place, though. I'd like to see the dress again. I might go back and look at it again on Halloween. I'm scared to go back, but I can't help but want to do it at the same time. It's been over 18 years since I lived by this pond. It started out as a small pond on a farm, with woods and fields all around. Things changed over time, though. The pond is now between 3 large neighborhoods and a public pool. It's only a small piece of wood away from all of that. I believe the pond was built in the early 1900s. It had 2 cross-shaped lines of barbed wire in it. I have no idea why the pond had razor wire in it. On the right, there were only 2 very old houses. On the left, about 100 yards away near the woods, there was a neighborhood. When I was a kid, we always talked about the pond like it was a secret. We didn't dare to look into it. But after 10 years, I really got into fishing. Almost every day after school, I'd go fishing to find new spots and better ones. This pond had more fish and was easier to get to than any other place. I came here almost every other day. A strange thing happened. One summer night, I stayed out late to try to catch a few more fish. A sudden bright light shone from behind me, like the lights of a big truck that had just pulled up with their brights on. I quickly turned around because I thought someone might have just parked their car in one of the drives. Around 100 yards behind me through the woods, I turned around because I thought I saw a car stopped in the driveway of a house. There was nothing there, though. Plus, the way the light was shining meant it couldn't have been from headlights. It was getting late, so I turned around and went back down the trail to the parking lot by the pool. The second strange event took place on a busy evening months later. A friend of mine, 2 other girls, and I went to the pond to hang out after school. At the same spot we were before, we saw a 3 to 5-year-old kid running away from an old house across the pond. We told the kid where his parents were and what he was doing because we were scared. The kid didn't really care about what we had to say. He then turned around and began talking to someone who wasn't there. He talked to someone who seemed to be telling him to go back to his parents. The kid argued that he only wanted to play with that person. Then the strangest thing happened. The child pointed to the water and said, and then he pointed straight down to the middle of the pond. We asked him where his dog was. He said, "That's where he drowned a year ago." No one could say anything for a moment. Then we took the kid back to the other side of the pond where his dad met us and took him home. Kids do make up friends in their heads all the time, but this felt real to me. It looked like the kid was talking to someone who wasn't there and responding to what they said. I have a lot of crazy stories about strange things I've seen or heard at this spot. I might share those too one day. Let's call my friend John. He liked being alone and fishing. I hadn't heard from him in a while after school was over. Then he told me an interesting story when we met at the grocery store last month. As a child, John loved fishing. To catch trout for dinner, he would go to lakes where there were lots of them. There are many places to fish here. Besides many, many miles of woods, there is sometimes a lake or road. A few houses are on the edge of that area, but other than that, it's out in the middle of nowhere. Old Swedish stories say that young people went to this spot to dance on Midsummer's Eve. There was a girl in the stories who was going to marry. In the middle of summer, a guy in black stepped out of the shadows and danced with her until her feet started to bleed. After that, he pulled her into the lake. Since then, people say that spot won't get green again. I've seen it for myself, along with the small lake. Anyway, John got his bike ready and rode to one of these lakes. He passed the lake from the stories at one point, but he didn't stop there. He kept riding his bike to another lake that was much nicer and less scary. Along with the open field behind it, there was a wall that blocked the wind. The woods around it were dark and old. The flower-filled field was bright and happy. In the summer in Sweden, it never gets really dark. There's still some light in the sky at night. Mist forms strange shapes over the lake in the evening. The elf dance is what these forms look like they're doing. John went fishing and used an open fire to cook the fish he caught. The seagulls that came out at night and made their creepy howling sounds were the only sounds. Then, when he was tired, he put his sleeping bag down in the shed. Just in case, he kept his bag with a big hunting knife next to him. He was about to fall asleep when he heard something in the field behind the shed. John could see the sky in the dark from the window in the shed that looked out over the lake. The steps were strong and loud, like someone walking in rubber boots. John yelled and his voice could be heard across the lake. The movement stopped. John wasn't sure what to think. It could have been a joke from one of his friends. But why didn't they answer or keep walking if it was? There was no sound at all. John could only hear the quick beat of his heart. The person who was walking toward the shed stopped, and they knew John was inside. He carefully took his hunting knife out of his bag and climbed up the wall, back against it. After that, he put his knife in front of him and waited. Still no sound. Had the person in the rubber boots snuck off to somewhere quiet? Did he still stand behind the shed, though? After about 15 minutes, all of a sudden, a dark figure jumped into the shed and struck John. John did not have time to respond. He felt something stab the knife he had in his hand. When it turned around, it ran out of the shed and down the lake toward the woods at top speed. John quickly put on his gear and ran the other way as fast as he could. He ran until he got to the houses, then slammed the first door he saw in the middle of the night. He left his bike and other things that were too heavy for him to move. A few months ago, I told him about this and he agreed. He thought it was strange because there wasn't a good place to run by the lake. Whatever it was, this big black thing or person was nowhere to be found. I'm an Ohio Eagle Scout, and I like to camp a lot. I like to fish on these trips because it gives me a break from the younger boys. This trip began with a lot of fun. We had a great time while eating and playing capture the flag. A lot of people went to bed when it got dark, but a friend and I chose to go fishing at midnight. It took us about an hour and a half to walk to a lake from our campsite, but I've always thought that the long walk was part of the fun, so it didn't bother us. Crickets and frogs were the first sounds we heard when we got there. We sat down, set up our fishing rods, and looked out at the stars. Something began to happen after about 45 minutes. First, all the frogs, crickets, and other sounds of the night stopped. The normal sounds of the night stopped all of a sudden, and the quiet was even louder than the sounds. I know this strange silence is always a bad sign because I spend a lot of time outside. To be honest, we were getting a little scared. We chose to go back to camp after being in this strange silence for a while. Things became very scary after that. It was getting dark, and we could hear a very loud screech coming from across the lake. We also heard trees breaking. The sounds got closer around the lake and came toward us, scaring us as we stood there. The fact that it was slowly getting closer made it even scarier. We've heard a lot of animal sounds, mostly from around here, but this is the first time we've heard something like this. We grabbed our pocket knives right away because we were so scared, but I didn't think they would help us much. We were both only 15 years old at the time, and whatever was out there seemed to have no trouble breaking those trees. We looked all over to find a place to hide. Then we saw one of those fixed bathrooms with a door that was almost off its hinges and only had a plastic window. We hurried to the bathroom. We both knelt down inside and tried to be as quiet as possible. We could hear things outside by the lake. Now, since I'm naturally curious, I couldn't help but take a look. The most scary thing I've ever seen was outside my window. Where we were fishing before, there was something there. It was very pale and very thin. It had long arms that ended in what looked like claws. It turned around all of a sudden like it knew someone was looking at it. It then looked right at me. We locked the door to the bathroom and I quickly slid back down to hide. Then we heard the sound of scratching outside. We were both afraid to look outside. That wasn't even the scariest part, though. As we hid in fear on the toilet floor, we heard someone or something outside ask, "Scouts, what did you do?" It sounded like my scoutmaster, but it wasn't him. His voice sounded loopy and strange. We heard this thing outside all night long. Finally, when dawn came, the sounds outside stopped. We had to wait for a few hours after dawn. I believe it was around 9:30. We slowly came out from hiding, our scared faces turning pale. We promised each other not to tell anyone when we got back to camp. We only recently realized that what we saw must have been a Wendigo while we were studying Native American stories. After that, we chose something. We'd bring more safety gear the next time we were brave enough to go fishing. I wanted to see that thing again, and maybe even talk to it to find out if it really was a magical being like the Wendigo. We still don't know what happened to our fishing sticks because they were gone when we came out. This took place when I was 9 years old in 2007. My family enjoys being outside. That summer, my dad, my two brothers, Luke, who is 15, and Owen, who is 12, were together as they do every year. Also, I camped in Virginia. I don't remember what the place was called, but it was in the woods and close to a beautiful lake. For the first few days, we did a lot of fun things. We set up our tent near the lake. My brothers and I got up early on the fourth day to go for a swim. Outside our tent, there was a big lake that we couldn't see. We quickly ate breakfast, put on our swim shorts, and just in case, grabbed our fishing gear before going to the lake. I thought my big brother Luke was more interested in the lake's big fishing pier. We saw two people fishing when we got to the lake. A man in his 40s was there with what looked like his 14-year-old son. The boy got up and said, "I wouldn't swim," when he saw us in our swim shorts. Owen just shrugged and jumped into the water head first without giving it much thought. I did what he did because I didn't want to miss out on the fun. While that was going on, Luke sat down next to the boy and set up his fishing pole. The farther away we were from the shore, the longer we swam. About 20 feet deep, the water was really deep. Owen and I were both good swimmers from being on the swim team back home, so we didn't think about it too much. One time I was swimming underwater with my eyes closed and enjoying the cool water. All of a sudden I felt someone grab my ankle. I opened my eyes quickly and pulled my leg away because I was so shocked. He had a tight grip on my ankle, which made me angry. I turned around and pushed him away. Then I saw something strange. Owen wasn't there. It swung its long bluish-green hair around its head. Its eyes were fully black and its legs were long and webbed. Its sharp, bent claws looked like a cat's, ready to grab and not let go. When it opened its lips, I saw rows of small, sharp teeth. Into the dark water, it pulled me down. I got scared and did what came naturally to me. I screamed and kicked, letting air out by accident, but I tried to get away by kicking it with my other foot. It screamed and opened its scary mouth again. It hurt my leg a lot when its sharp claws scratched it. Not long after that, I saw my red collar float above the water. I had a wound. I knew I couldn't beat this thing. It was hard for me to see because my head was spinning. It made me feel strangely better to know that I had drowned before that thing could hurt me more. I shut my eyes because I was tired. All of a sudden, strong hands grabbed my arms and pulled me to the surface. It hurt a lot, and I could see that it was cut pretty badly. Luke and Owen woke up Dad and helped me get back to our tent. They took me to the emergency room right away. My leg was fine after the blood was cleaned up, so I didn't need stitches. I still have some light scars from that day, though. Afterward, they told me that Luke got scared when I didn't come back up and went to look for me with Owen. When they found me, they said they saw something swim away really quickly in the water, but it was gone before they could make out what it was. Everyone knew about the strange thing. I told them everything I could remember. No one did believe me, though. They thought I was making things up. It was likely one of the gar that the boy had warned us about, they said. I'm sure of what I saw, though. That day, my eyes were telling the truth. I'd really like to know what that thing was, if anyone knows. Let me talk a little about the scene before I start the story. It was nice to stay at a house in Ontario. This cottage was in a small neighborhood with 12 other houses. All of them were set up in a half circle around a nice park. There were big trees, a small playground, and a picnic place in the park. There was a beautiful lake nearby where people could swim, fish, and boat. My older brother and I made friends with a 14-year-old kid named Brandon while we were there. Brandon liked hanging out with us more than being with his family and would often go off by himself. I never knew why someone wouldn't want to be close to their parents when I was a kid. It could be because I used to be a bit of a goody-goody. I always did what my parents told me to do. Try to stay out of danger and always follow the rules. Also, I really didn't like Brandon very much because he was a pain. However, he was friendly with my brother. I looked up to my brother so much that I would follow him around, even if it meant hanging out with Brandon. It made me feel like my brother was the coolest person in the world to want to do everything he did. Brandon finally thought of a way to sneak out, and my brother went with him. I had to join them because we shared a room. At first, we just went to the park and hung out for a while, enjoying the cool air blowing through the trees and the quiet night. However, we quickly got bored and wished we had done something more interesting. While I suggested that we end the night and go to bed, it was the older kids who made the choice. Brandon suggested that we go wandering in the woods. I tried to stop them, but they didn't listen to me. We were not excited to go into the woods, and the only thing that could lead us was the dim light from Brandon's phone. The woods weren't too thick, thank goodness. The freeway was only a few miles away, but you could hear it hum. I was ready to go back after a short walk, but I could only do two things. You can either walk back by yourself in the dark, or stay with them. Things were quiet in the woods after a while. Not a cricket, not any owls, not even a breeze. We all stopped and paid attention after I said this. There was quiet for a few seconds before my brother spoke up, sounding annoyed. "I am trying to hear you." I told him I didn't make any noise because I didn't understand. He then said that my deep breathing sounded like a pig that was dying and told me to calm down. I was about to fight when I heard someone breathe. It felt heavy and sounded hard. I said in a whisper, "That's not me. I hear it too." My brother looked at me. The breathing then got louder, like it was getting excited. There were two lights above us. They were glowing brightly in a brilliant blue color and moving slowly from side to side. It was almost like we were under a spell because we couldn't take our eyes off of them. Suddenly, there was a chilling moan that sent shivers down our spines. The sound was like someone who had been smoking for years was trying to scream but was gasping for air. We then began to run. Behind us, we could hear trees shaking and twigs breaking. Whatever it was, it looked like it was in the trees. Because my feet are so small, I can't run too fast. So I knew I couldn't keep it up for long. Soon my legs hurt and I had to stop. My brother and Brandon kept running ahead, leaving me behind. No matter what it was still getting closer quickly. I jumped into a close bush. It wasn't my luck, though, because it turned out to be a thorn bush. I got cuts and scratches all over in a matter of seconds. So I wouldn't cry out in pain. I had to bite my lip. As I tried to remain silent, I heard something heavy hit the ground nearby in the bush. I was hidden in the bush and saw the two lights from before shining into the small opening where I was. These were not lights, though. They looked like eyes. With those eyes, I saw something that looked like it was from a scary dream. It was thin and about 7 feet tall. The color of its skin was dark gray. It had very long arms with claws at the ends. After looking around for a while, it stood there for a long time. I hid in that bush for hours. I didn't dare move until I saw the sun rise all the way above the horizon. After gathering strength, I ran in the direction I thought the cabin was. I didn't care that the thorn bush had torn my clothes to pieces or that I was bleeding a lot. As I ran through the bush for what seemed like forever, I didn't pay attention to how my legs felt like they were on fire. I jumped out of the woods and landed on a busy highway. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with loud machines and worried people all around me. Someone must have seen me coming out of the woods in torn clothes and called for help. They didn't believe me when I told them what happened. Everyone thought I was crazy because I had been in the woods for too long, but I held firm. I wasn't home when my brother got home. He told me what happened in the morning. Then a search party was put together before they got the call to come get me. It's been more than 7 long years since those scary events, and I've spent countless hours searching the internet for anything that could help me figure out who that strange creature was. I spent a lot of time at my friend James's house when I was younger. I liked him a lot and thought of him as a brother. Since I didn't have any siblings and didn't get along with my parents, I spent as much time as I could at James's house. They would sometimes act like they didn't like us going to the backyard, where he had a small man cave because we always did. We played video games on the couch in that nice room, but his parents would get mad if I spent too much time with him. James's dad would come down, knock on the door, open it, and act like James had to go to bed. He said things like that, but we knew he only wanted me to leave. I would leave right away whenever his dad came down and knocked loudly on the door. I didn't want to bother them because that was the only place I felt at ease or at home. After that, I went back to my house, which was awful. Every time I did something wrong, my mom would yell at me about the sink, dirty dishes, dirty clothes, and anything else. She always had something bad to say, which made me feel very stressed. She would get angry over little things and start to complain. It was hard for me to deal with her. I think she was just letting out some stress. It wasn't fun at all for me as an 18-year-old guy who was still trying to figure out his life. I couldn't drive at this time, so I walked to James's place. It took me about 10 minutes to walk to his house or 3 or 4 minutes to run. There was nothing I liked more than running in the summer. It made me smell bad when I got to his house. I hate going to bed wet, so if I ran back home before bed, I'd have to take a shower. I stayed at James's house that night until around midnight. I looked at my phone and then at James. We both smiled because we knew that his dad would soon knock on the door to tell me to leave. That's why I chose not to have that happen. To keep their good mood, I would leave early tonight. It could make his family like me more. Because I was leaving, I told James. Before I left, we shook hands. It was completely dark outside because it was midnight when I walked down their road. Around the middle of my walk, as I got closer to my own street, I heard some strange sounds ahead. Someone seemed to be grunting or groaning. It sounded like the sounds were coming from a few yards ahead of me, so I kept walking and listening carefully. There was more and more noise as I got closer. There were trees between the two paths. I call them walks, but they're really just dirt roads that go next to houses. It was hard to see what was ahead or in the next yard because of the bushes. When I finally got close enough, I thought I could reach out and touch it. The noise seemed to be coming from the other side of the last bush I had to go through. To get a better look at what was making those grunting sounds, I slowed down and naturally stepped into the road. I saw some gray hair as I walked by the bush. It looked like an old woman's hair. I kept walking, and to my surprise, there was an old woman, maybe in her 80s, grunting and groaning on the front lawn. Right away, I rushed to help her because it felt right. She was in the recovery position when I carefully moved her there. I only knew how to do that. We learned that in high school, or maybe even grade school, if I remember right. She didn't say anything, not reacting at all, just grunting. I left her there because I didn't know what else to do. I hoped it was the right thing to do. The doctors got there in about 5 minutes, but it felt like 50. I've never felt so tired in 5 minutes. I thought over and over that I was in charge of this woman's life. I had never had to do anything like this or done CPR before. I just knew that putting her in the resting position would help. It would have been scary if she had died while I was there. Thank goodness she didn't. The doctors came and took her away. Even though I only talk to James when I'm in my neighborhood, I wave to her whenever I see her working in her garden. While I was walking back from James's house, I didn't expect to see her that way. I've done that walk a million times since then, though, and nothing strange has ever happened again. This took place about 2 years ago, before the outbreak. My mental health and my relationship with my parents were not good at the time. It was hard for me because I often felt alone and not understood, which made things even worse. It gets even worse because one of my good friends has moved away. We had gone on a few dates together. We were close, so it was a shock to lose him that way. I remember being numb and empty after the loss and not being able to deal with it. In the end, I started having bad thoughts. One thing was always the same, even though I don't remember everything that happened in each one. No matter where I was, the room would get darker and darker. Since all of my dreams are from my own point of view, I felt like a strange dark haze was coming into my vision. What was even worse was that the whole room would go dark, like in Lord of the Rings when Gandalf gets mad at Bilbo and everything goes dark all at once. That's the best way I can explain it. In my dream, though, it was even darker and heavy. It would then make me feel cold and heavy in the stomach, along with total fear, even though I couldn't see anything else and nothing had happened yet. Then, if there were people in my dream before, they would drop out of the picture when it got dark. Or, all of them would stare at me with blank, dead faces in an instant. It's scary enough to have one bad dream, but this happened every single time. People would have been looking at me if they hadn't gone away. It would then feel this way. You might have felt that strange pins and needles feeling when your arm or leg fell asleep. This is kind of like that, but worse, and it gets heavier as it goes on. I feel like someone or something is squeezing me so hard that it's killing me. It even feels like it's choking me sometimes when it's on my throat. I'm really scared and think there is darkness all around me. A lot of the time I hear a loud buzzing sound in my head, like when you hear junk on the TV mixed with the sound of cicadas. You can't think, talk, or fight against it at all. The cycle will keep going until I can free myself and wake up. But that's not always where the fear ends. I could sometimes not fall back to sleep after being awake for an hour or two, because the dream would start over where it left off if I tried, and whatever was making it happen would keep doing it. In the end, I stopped talking to my parents in 2021 and went through a lot of hard living situations and big life changes that I won't talk about. I finally moved in with my best friend who has a small house out in the country. We'll call her Amelia. The friend in question is very religious and a truly wonderful person all around. I slept on a very small cushion in the small loft of her home, which was upstairs. Like she often did for another friend, Amelia babysat overnight one night, leaving me alone in the cabin to try to rest. I hadn't had one of those dreams in over a month. For some reason, my dreams start slowly most of the time. This time, though, it was like being thrown into a movie without knowing what was going on. It all happened quickly. There wasn't time to figure out what was going on. It's clear to me that I stumbled out of the cabin, jumped into my Jeep, and sped down the dark back roads where I used to live. I almost went crazy. A few times I was in charge of the car, But I kept going fast while frantically calling Amelia on the phone. I told her I was going to drive myself to the hospital because I was really sick and something bad was going to happen. Her voice began to fade as she asked what was wrong. I heard a low, scary, growling voice instead. It talked to me in my ear in strange words I didn't understand. It didn't sound like the phone at all. I looked in the dashboard rearview mirror, but then the scary part of the dream came true. My Jeep's headlights went out all of a sudden and I couldn't turn them back on. It was getting in the way of my view. At that point, though, my dream did something different for the first time ever. A big hand went through the back of my head and through my hair. Because it was so big, I thought its palm could easily cover the back of my head, close to my neck. But its fingers still touched my face. I could even feel claws brushing against my skin. When the hand reached for some of my hair at the back of my head, it pulled my head back hard until I was pushed against the car seat. I felt like something heavy was pushing down on me, and the growling was getting louder. I was so scared that I thought I was screaming but wasn't. I had my mouth open very wide, but nothing was coming out. No matter what it was, I knew it hated me very much. After that, I remembered what Amelia told me about these dreams when I talked to her about them. She taught me the Lord's Prayer and told me to ask God to keep me safe through the Holy Spirit and Saint Michael. This is something I've never done before. There was a time when I begged God to help me. I told him I would always believe in him if he helped me beat this thing and get rid of it. When I cried out to God, the hold on my hair began to weaken. I thought this thing was letting go, but it was moving slowly, like it didn't want to. The noise in my ears and the strange feeling in my stomach began to go away. I finally woke up all the way. I quickly got up and looked up at the stairs and window in the loft. I saw it. It was the first time I saw it in real life, not in a dream. The house doesn't have any light. Don't forget that I'm on the second floor. Its two red eyes were looking at me from the chimney window, so I knew that thing was it. There were big red lines all over, and the whites of its eyes were also red. The only thing I could see was its head, which was a strange shape. But the fact that it was looking at me from a window on the second floor, where there were no trees or air conditioners to stand on, said it all. The thing that looked in through that window had to be over 8 feet tall. I called Amelia right away. So she would listen to me talk about my dream, I asked her to stay on the phone with me. Even though it was 3 a.m., Amelia could start her journey back because her friend was home. I put her on speakerphone and she prayed loudly for me while I prayed. She also told me to burn some white sage. Soon the cabin stopped feeling scary and dark. Everything was back to normal by the time she got home. I began going to church with Amelia after that night. I often prayed with her, and I even made up my own prayer to say every night before bed. I no longer have those thoughts as long as I say the prayer, and I moved into a new room by myself since then. I haven't seen or felt that thing since then. I still pray every night and talk to Amelia. You know, some people might think this is crazy or that I can't believe that thing was a monster. However, I must say that you know when you're really up against something bad, something that wants you to know it's bad and wants to hurt you badly.